On Q, only on Q95, the big station.
A pleasant good evening to you at home or in your vehicle if you are on the road or at work or listening on the radio or on the internet. Thank you for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. It is Tuesday, the 20th day of July 2026. It is the 30th Tuesday of 2026, and it's just about 7:57 p.m. in the studios at Q95. So we're a couple of minutes early on the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages, or on your phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro Caribbean brothers and sisters. This is, in fact, our 21st Global View on Q show for 2026, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. With me tonight is my co host, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, Dr. Damian Dublin, Chairman of Dominica's Reparations Committee, who otherwise needs no introduction, really. Miss Merita Hyacinth, Chief Youth Development Officer, former teacher of history and IT, former education officer, JCI Senator, writer and owner of Magenesis. And also with us tonight is Miss Natasha Eloy Labad, 2024 Female CEO of the Year, member of the DRC, owner of Afro Caribbean Art and Fashion Boutique, and outsource consultant. A very pleasant good evening to all of you, very gentle people. Tonight, we continue the discussion of the topic that we started off last week. And the topic is, what does reparations mean for Dominica? So here are a few talking points or questions, if you'd like. We start off with the genesis of the Reparations Committee. What is their mandate, the objectives, the strategies, the local, regional, global impacts, the role and resolutions of the UN? What are their achievements thus far? What is the role of Africa, the connections with Africa, linkages, trade, direct flights? We will review their 10-point plan and the present status of the reparations movement. Then we'll ask, how do we go about selling the notion of reparation? Somebody's mic is unmuted. Please mute your mic. How was the reparations committee constituted to achieve the desired results? Did we tap into our human resources to enhance our chances of obtaining reparations? We continue to ask, what is the case for reparations for Dominica? What does it mean? Are we owed reparations? Who owes us and how should this be measured? Who is to pay these reparations? Who should receive that payment? What should be done with the proceeds? Can our current leaders be trusted with that money? Will it be used for the benefit of those who need it most? How should reparations be administered if we do receive reparations? Should the descendants of slaves receive compensation from those who enslaved their ancestors? Why should they receive payment for past wrongs? Are there any precedents for such payments? And do intergenerational trauma and economic legacies of slavery justify reparations? So we look forward to the contributions of Justice Dr. Irving Andre, Dr. Damian Dublin, Chairman of Dominica's Reparations Committee, Ms. Merita Hyacinth, and Mr. Tasha Eloy Labad. As we continue to discuss this topic, what does reparations mean for Dominica? So as usual, we invite you, our Q family and friends of Dominica, to help us give our usual huge shout out and big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and public and private sector, patriots and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. We welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console, directing the traffic. We will take your calls. As you know, The people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So thank you, Dr. Damien Dublin and Ms. Marita Mahyacinth and Mr. Tasha Eloy Labat for participating in discussion tonight. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his first comments as we continue to discuss the topic, what does reparations mean for Dominica? Over to you, Dr. Andre.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. G. Let me welcome the panelists. We're looking eagerly to hear what they have to say this evening. Last week, we discussed the issue of reparations. We gave some of its historical antecedents. We talked about some of the pitfalls with the reparation movement. And this evening, we expect to get probably a more deeper insight into the reparations committee as it relates to Dominic. On one level, it appears that the movement for reparations is gaining some steam. That may be evidenced by the fact that in March of 2026, the UN General Assembly, they passed a resolution supported primarily by Caribbean countries and African countries for a declaration that the transatlantic slave trade was the greatest crime against humanity. So at least at one level, that was some success. But on another level, it shows the intransigence of those who are most responsible, perhaps, for paying reparations. Because 123 countries supported the resolution, 3 opposed. Who were the 3? Surprise, the United States, second, Israel. And it's poignant irony that Israel opposed it, because Israel, since 1952, received $82 billion from Germany on account of Nazism and so on. And the third country, surprise again, Argentina, the same country that had so many black players on its team. And the history of Nazism and the exodus of persons involved in Hitler's political party is inextricably tied with Argentina, because thousands or tens of thousands of Nazi persons fled and got sanctuary in Argentina. And that explains why during the World Cup, so many of the European countries had a significant number of racialized players. The only standout, or the major standout, being Argentina. But it's not only 3 countries that opposed. There were 53 abstentions. 53 abstentions, mostly European countries. They wanted nothing to do with reparations. In fact, in 2007, Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister, said, well, he said, yes, we should apologize, but nothing has gone beyond an apology. So within this context, we have to look at what the Caribbean countries, Dominica included, have done to push the agenda insofar as reparations are concerned. I know that our local committee has come up with a 10-point plan, which is commendable. The Caribbean islands, or the Caribbean countries, some 13 of them, have recently come up with a proposal that the amount of reparations to be paid amount to $33 trillion. Some persons may say, well, they're dreaming in La La Land, and that may well be the case, because the Europeans, the countries most responsible for the enslavement of Africans, and we gave statistics last week, they have shown a singular intransigence in paying any kinds of reparations. Indeed, last week, Mr. G, you quoted a British parliamentarian of the Reform Party, formerly the Conservative Party, South Asian, to be ironic, when she said that these countries, these colonies of Britain, benefited significantly, as opposed to Britain having to pay them any compensation for historical wrongs. So that is the backdrop against which reparations, that issue is being fought. It's unfortunate that within, as I said, this fight, the European countries are not averse to paying reparations. I give the example of Germany. I will give the example of England, as I gave last week. They paid $20 million in 1833 to former slave owners. Many Caribbean slave owners, many Dominican slave owners, white, black, blue, brown, well, actually white and colored, received reparations on account of slavery. they paid none to the Africans. Not only did they pay none, they actually introduced a legislative mechanism to further enslave them, because they passed a piece of legislation, euphemistic law, the Apprenticeship Act, in which the ex-slaves had to offer their labor to their former slave owners for 4 years. But even after the expiration of that period of time, they still enacted legislation to ensure that the ex-slave tied themselves inextricably to their former slave masters. They enacted legislation called, for example, the Habitual Idlers Act, the Vagrancy Acts, which still exist in many countries. I think in some form it still exists in Dominica, quite frankly. Whereas if, certainly in Canada, there's legislation, particularly in the 1930s, if you're out of your house after 12, you're automatically deemed as a vagrant, and you could be charged and prosecuted and imprisoned. In fact, in the 1930s, particularly indigenous persons, they were literally charged, jailed, and ordered to leave the city where they were charged because they were vagrants. And Canada has a long history of dealing with these issues and also dealing with issues of reparation. They paid over $18 billion to the indigenous communities for the historical enslavement and ill treatment of indigenous people in Canada. They also paid reparations to Japanese interns who interned in Canada and the United States during World War II, because there was a perception that all Japanese persons were enemies of the Allies. So they paid reparations. The French paid reparations to they didn't pay. The French didn't pay anything. The French they literally crucified Haiti financially and forced them to pay billions of dollars from 1915. Is it 1915? No, wrong. From 1815 or thereabouts to 1947. Billions of dollars to the French because of the Haitian Revolution and the destruction of the estates owned by French nationals. So the Europeans, those who are most averse or opposed to the payment of reparations, had no difficulty forcing colonized countries to pay reparations to them. So this is the struggle that the movement for reparations face now. There is an institutional opposition to the payment of it. That institutional opposition has increased on account of the general right-wing winds that have blown not only in Europe, but also in America. And while I appreciate that England has a Labour government, it seems to me that there are strong headwinds from the reform/conservative movement, which will press any new administration in England, Labour administration, further to the right. So it seems to me that it's an extremely tough uphill task to get these countries to pay any kind of reparations. But let me say this, reparations is not simply the payment of cash, l'argent. And I think this is what the European countries are most averse to, payment of cash. And I think, quite frankly, giving cash to some of these governments, including some of these West Indian governments, would be a disaster, I put it bluntly. I have no hesitation in saying so. I think in terms of the success of the reparations movement, what will probably gain some traction is reparation in a different form. For example, the forgiveness of debt. I think the Caribbean governments have recommended that form of reparations. Perhaps literary programs. Perhaps, it seems to me, and that's my injection, concessions in terms of the export of goods. Remember that we could sell our bananas at preferential rates in England. And I think that dissipated with the formation of the European, with the involvement of the European Union, sorry. The easing of transport, the easing of movement between the Dominicans or the West Indian Islands and England. And as we know, in the last few years, there actually have been an encroachment on the ease of which we could travel to England. So that's a regressive step, to be honest with you. And those kinds of measures seeking to ameliorate the conditions of people on the ground, as opposed to helping governments stay in power. So I think that is where the reparations movement will inevitably gain some success, a series of measures that will help or inure to the benefit of the Dominican people, as opposed to the government. And I think that is basically where we will see some success in the future. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Andrew, before I let you go, this lady from the British Parliament who said that the colonies should in fact pay Britain reparations. I believe the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, had a sort of rough response to her. I don't know whether you picked that up.
Oh, absolutely. And the cruel irony is under the stewardship of Winston Churchill, India suffered a famine because of the policies of the British government during World War II, to a point where it lost millions of its citizens. And Suella Braverman, who is of English ancestry, and a lawyer to boot, for God's sakes, one would expect that she would be somewhat sensitive to that cruel aspect of her history. In fact, the Indian economy, or the Indian community, as we speak, they have some strong anti-colonial beliefs, which is evident in their laws. For example, they're trying to break down institutional racism, whether it's on the basis of caste, whether it's on the basis of English legacies. But in England, there is a kind of terrified consciousness in some sense, because India, in addition to South Africa, and right here in the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic, these countries, they have the biggest markets. For what product? Ointment to turn your skin white, Mr. G. So don't be shy that these countries are the biggest countries in the West Indies. You also are curious for persons for markets, for these types of products, to get your skin a whiter shade of pale, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andre, for your very nice opening remarks. Dr. Damian Dublin, you're the chairman of Dominica's Reparations Committee. You've been you've let us know how long you've been since when the committee was started and how long you've been chairing it. And then you can talk to us about, to get this conversation going, you can talk about the genesis of the Reparations Committees, what their mandate and objectives are, and so on. And let's get started with you, Damian.
Good evening to fellow panelists. Good evening to listeners. I think Dr. Andrews set the piece well. They gave a good synopsis of the whole reparation movement and the difficulty we face, but we forge on. CARICOM took a very important decision in 2014 when they decided to establish a CARICOM Reparations Commission. We call it CRC. 2014. Fortunately, I was at that meeting, but I wasn't supposed to be there. There was somebody else who had to go, but it was couldn't make it, so they recommended me, and it was an experience. At that time, the whole reparation narrative was around. I mean, the Rastafari and the movement for New Dominica. These guys have been calling for closer connection to Africa and realization of your roots. So it was a really eye-opener. Now, one of the mandates from that meeting was to form national reparations committees in islands where they were not. There existed reparations committees in Barbados, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Antigua, Bahamas, but in Dominica, there's not a reparations committee. So on my return, we established the committee in 2014. Incidentally, because it was a CARICOM initiative, the first reparations committee was established by an act of, it was really a cabinet decision where the members of that committee were it was well spread out. There was the Kalinago chief was a member, the trade union rep, Pan-Africanist, Rastafari. I think Dr. Lennox Honeychurch was on that initial. So the initial committee of 9, given a mandate to serve for a period of 1 year in the first instance. They appointed me chair of that committee, so I took charge, and the good thing is the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the way it's set up, the chairman of all national reparations committees are members. So when the CARICOM Reparations Committee has meetings, the chairman of the various national reparations committees sit at this meeting. So we are kept abreast of what's happening at the wider level. So when this committee was formed, we realized the first order of the day was to really disseminate information and create awareness. So we set out to have public address, go to the schools, to the college, have panel discussions, and really generally creating awareness. I also realized that the first committee had no women representative on it. The committee of nine men. So we made a recommendation that the committee should be expanded, and it was expanded. The 2 women were included. The other representative from the National Youth Council and another women. So it moved from 9 to 11. It was further expanded to 15, where more representation was obtained. So basically, the committee made a number of recommendations. We felt that the question of Black history should be taught in schools. We felt that there should be a naming and renaming project. Basically, like naming, we realize we have a lot of prominent people, a lot of national heroes who have excelled in various fields, in teaching and other aspects. So we felt that some of the schools, public places should be named after our people. The renaming project was actually to replace some of the names. For example, the colonial names like Queen Mary Street, Princess Margaret Hospital, just the wide range, and some of the statues around which maintain the semblance of colonialism. So all these were recommendations. We also recommended that a monument should be erected in favor of the indigenous people. So these are a number of recommendations that will put forward, and we were advocating for. I would want to say that the mandate established by the CARICOM Reparations Committee was really threefold, but for Dominica, it was particularly interested because the first mandate was to seek reparations for the transatlantic slavery. The second was reparations for the racialized system of chattel slavery, and the third was for native genocide. So interestingly, it was only Dominica and St. Vincent which had native people residing. We had the Kalinagos, St. Vincent, have the Garifuna. So these were the 3 pillars which was established, and the committee really, at that early stage, was really a question of trying to get the reparations narrative to as much people as possible. The strategies were twofold. One, it was felt that the initial strategy could be a legal battle, legally, where you do research and get the information and then present it as a court case, because that was a strategy which was used in other jurisdictions, and it worked. Like in Kenya, that worked for the Mau Maus, where they presented their case and they got reparations. Diplomatic circles, we felt that because the CARICOM initiative, when people go to different fora like United Nations, OAS meetings, they would advance the whole idea of reparations. Interestingly, for the legal aspect, a law firm was hired. That's a law firm which had success already in getting reparations, but as is everything, it was very costly to maintain that path. So we kind of work out other strategies to get it going. So one of the strategies was we came up with this 10-point plan, which is, I'll tell you, the 10-point plan is like a template. It's a developmental focus, and this document which is in final draft and review. So we established the 10-point plan, and then it's on the final review, and a lot of reparation movements, countries in Africa, in Europe, in the United States, they're actually waiting on this document because it's it as a template for reparative justice. As was said earlier, reparations is not only about the money. Dr. Angie mentioned a figure. It's always difficult. It was very difficult to come up with a figure. But some economists were employed, a few of them met, and they worked it out, come up to the figure he mentioned. But the 10-point plan, just some of the areas he mentioned are included in it. It's not just about money. It's about debt cancellation. It's about the whole psychological rehabilitation, the question of health. So it's what we actually, as a race, missed during the time of colonialism, where we could have, through our own coming together and machinations, could have been further developed, whereas the colonial countries developed using the labor, profiting from the labor of blacks. So it was a whole economic system backed up by legal, all the frequency laws he mentioned. The church had a part to play in really at that time, supporting it and blessing the movements. It was, in some cases, the Bible was actually quoted to justify some of the atrocities and to make the people subservient to things. But I would say that Dr. Evin mentioned that the reparation movement is picking up very nicely. For a lot of advocacy, we have the chair, Dr. Hilary Beckles, who always on the move, giving lectures at universities, be it in England, in Europe, in Africa. And we can actually now see some sort of movement and feel more confident that the reparation movement is picking up nicely. As was mentioned, this historic event that Ghana pushed, and I want to mention that CARICOM Reparations Commission was side by side negotiating with Ghana and helping them to craft the resolution. It was a joint effort, and we were able to get the United Nations to pass this resolution. I mean, this was a big impetus and push, and we felt it helped the narrative. It's important to note that the United Nations have declared in 2015, they declared the first decade of people of African descent from 2015 to 2024. Through continuous lobby, they in fact had a second decade which starts from 2025 to 2024. So it shows that after the first decade, that the movement and the respect and the pushing of the reparation movement caused the United Nations to declare a second decade. So I can say that I feel confident that we're gaining traction, that more and more people are coming on board. In fact, the church Pope, the recent Pope actually issued an apology. I mean, who would ever imagine that the Pope would issue an apology for reparations? But it was just an apology, which is the same thing that's happening with all the colonial countries. The CARICOM Reparations Committee wrote to every single government who was involved in slavery, from Britain to the Netherlands, and all of them expression of regret. They staying away from the apology because, as Dr. Angie mentioned, once you apologize, then probably the whole legal binding of paying the actual reparations. So their fear is really dishing out the cash, maybe to maybe enslave Africans, but they have no problem dishing it out to maybe to their own people, to their planters in Dominica. As you said, 20 million pounds were paid to them for losing their property after emancipation. So you see, the whole laws were crafted to support this whole economic movement. So once you're deemed as property legally, if you lost your property for emancipation, then they have to be compensated. So they were compensated, which the British government paid, and as we say, the enslaved Africans. I prefer to use the term enslaved Africans because I don't think we were ever slaves. We came from a mighty race. I mean, there was the history of Black people. I mean, doesn't start with slavery or enslavement. We had mighty kingdoms before. I mean, the names we can call, and anybody who's a student of history would know. Established societies respected before the laws and norms, and so I say enslaved Africans because we never gave up. The struggle continued from within Africa along the path, and even on landing, where the story of the Maroons is a story of resistance. I mean, you're talking about guys who were African chiefs coming to Dominica. These guys would have never subdued themselves to any kind of slavery. So they were the ones who were leading the Bala, the Jacko. These were the guys who really. And interestingly, that we must note that the Kalinago and the enslaved Africans worked together. There was collaboration because the Kalinago were there before, they knew the tracks, and they actually worked together with the enslaved Africans. So we feel that's a good example which could be had where the in Dominica itself, where the descendants of enslaved Africans and Kalinago continue to work together for the good of for the betterment of the country. So
Yeah, but Damien, let me ask you this. As a chairman of the Dominica Reparations Committee, do you feel that the Dominican population is sufficiently aware and engaged in the whole process of reparations and the whole thinking, the whole notion behind it? That is the first question. And then secondly, when we talk about the laws, I mean, we know that when you go to the court, I mean, these countries will go to court. I mean, they're not just going to pay reparations. You see this lady in England already saying the colony should pay England, and it should be the other way around. You know they're going to say, well, look, who is aggrieved? I mean, in your generation, who is aggrieved? And you're now talking about going to court for reparations. Are you aggrieved? I mean, is the court going to be asked to pay you for something that your ancestors, endured? And you, in fact, so I mean, we can see now there is some legal implication in terms of getting the money. So, I mean, have your committee addressed that?
Yes, well, actually, I would say the narrative has picked up. I mean, at one time, there was little talk of reparations. As I said earlier, the Africans, the progressive guys at that time, this is Rosie Douglas and them guys would talk about the African slavery and reparations. But in this present day, the narrative is most widespread. We have been to the schools. In fact, every Black History Month, we go to various schools where we give lectures. And the important thing, you go to the schools and the students are, I mean, just amazed and just like sponges. They're waiting for the information and they ask the questions. But the only thing is you pass there, you give the talk, and then after that, it's difficult to sustain because the whole education system is not geared towards maintaining that kind of narrative. But I would want to say that the population is much aware. People asking questions, people participating in activities, and they're asking questions. But we always have to make the difference that it's not only about money. Some people asking the same question: when I'm gonna get, when I'm gonna get my pay. So I mean, the 10-point plan would, as we are pushing, would effectively broaden the scope and show them it's not
Okay.
about money. It's about repairing the damage that was
Okay.
done and giving us a chance to get back on track.
It's excellent. Dr. Andrew, let me just go back to you briefly because you know this question of the laws, the legal aspect of the thing in terms of making those actual payments, making the case in court for reparations. How difficult is that? I mean, what barriers could you find in illegal circles?
Well, one of the main legal arguments made by those countries who are resisting having to pay reparations is that at the time that persons were extricated forcefully from Africa, slavery was not a criminal offense. The enslavement of persons were not a criminal offense. In fact, a significant sector of the population, whether in England or in Europe, did not even consider slaves as humans. So that is one of the main justifications. And the other justification is that, look, I shouldn't be accountable for what my forefathers did. And in terms of the question you just asked, Damien, well, why should he or why should Dominicans receive compensation from the descendants of persons who may have harmed them? What harm has he suffered? There is a phenomenon called intergenerational trauma. The legacy of slavery continues to exist. The legacy of British colonialism continues to exist. The class society, it's more evident in India, although in India you had the added difficulty of the caste system. But in terms of our veneration of anything white, that is a distinct legacy of colonialism. And it's still evident in Dominica, to be quite frank with you, and elsewhere, other Caribbean islands. It's somewhat, well, what should I share? It's disheartening. If you, as a keen observer, you spend some time in the Barbados, and you see how certain persons, subject to their complexion, how they are treated. So the legacies still continue to exist. And that is a counter argument against the argument that, look, I haven't done you anything, but you've benefited. One of the things we haven't mentioned, but we did mention last week, is that many of the institutions of learning benefited. Oxford, Harvard, in kind of McGill, Queen's University. McGill was named after a slave owner. Many of these institutions benefited, but not only that, many of the students who received admission or gained admission to these universities were part of the aristocracy, particularly in England. They gained not on account of academic prowess, but on the basis of ancestry. And many of these old landed aristocrats, their wealth was based on monies generated from Barbados, from Jamaica, Dominica to a lesser extent. So this whole big question, this whole point about is not our fault, we didn't benefit, why are you coming against us, is pure hypocrisy in my respectful view. So that there is a case to be made. That's the thing. And the question is, well, I don't want to, well, you want me to continue, or you want your other two panelists to put their $10 or their $10,000 worth of contribution?
I'll give you a couple more minutes to just, wrap up.
But bear in mind one thing, in terms of Dominica itself, Dominica has a rich history of involvement and contribution to Africa. Ask Gabriel Christian, he'll tell you about a relative called James Christian, who went to Ghana on about 1903. And he was basically an icon. He's regarded as an icon in the legal fraternity on the basis of his work in Ghana. Then you have, for example, a number of distinguished legal luminaries from Dominica. Telford George being the most prominent. He was the Chief Justice of which country? Can't remember. Probably Nigeria. Then you have Ashton Piper, who also worked in Nigeria, or who worked in Nigeria. Don Liverpool had a limited tenure in Africa. But not only that, we had Dominican educators, intellectuals, people like Bernard Wiltshire, who taught in Africa. We also had Ron Green. We had Rosie Douglas, who was the chairperson of the Mathaba in Cuba, in Libya, I'm sorry. And that organization assisted so many liberation struggles, not only in Africa, but also in Latin America, In fact, it was through Rose's efforts, at least he made a significant contribution in assisting the ANC receive funding from Gaddafi in Libya. So we, our small country, we do have a significant, proud history of involvement and contributing to the welfare and well-being of Africa and so on. And again, I don't know the composition of the reparation movement in Dominica, but I hope, if not now, but at some point, that that they would reach out. Well, that's probably not fair. It's not their decision. It's the government's decision to tap the resources. People like Crispin Gregoire, who actually worked in Africa, and he also has significant connections based on his tenure in the United Nations. People like him, we hope that that they can reach out to get Dr. IP, for example, also has significant roots in Africa. We hope that the movement can gain steam by incorporating the contributions of persons who have a unique perspective and who have certain ties. Because in my view, the ultimate success of these countries paying reparations is whether it becomes politically feasible to do so. Whether there is a movement either in the United States, either in England, either in Europe, which puts pressure, moral and political pressure on the political potentates that, look, you have to make amends for that dirty part of our past. I think it's only then that you'll have some success in terms of reparations being paid by those countries that abstained, 53 of them, the most powerful countries in the world. That, in my view, is the only hope that we have as a society to get any type of reparations from these countries.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. J, quickly, just to close up, and you're making a significant point, and that is exactly where the movement is having. Realize that the legal path would be too long and burden expensive. So really the focus is on pressure, mass movement, rising up and pushing them at a point where they have to do it. So that is what, and we're actually seeing it, the pressure is building, it's happening. I'd want to state that the University of Glasgow, they have committed 20 million to the University of the West Indies through doing research and showing them that the university actually benefited from the proceeds of slavery. So you find a lot of individual universities are coming forward. Even some insurance companies are actually willing to contribute, but you must have a framework and a plan. So that's the approach. The legal aspect have been kind of put on the wayside for a while.
Okay, excellent. Of course, as I go to Ms. Hyacinth, I just wanted to note the comment made by Dr. Andre that the government and the committee needs to tap into the resources that are available, the Dominican brains, Dominican expertise, Dominican experience, people who have experience in Africa, to be able to enhance the whole movement and to really make the case, you know. So, Ms. Hyacinth, good to have you on tonight. As you give us your thoughts, your opening thoughts on the topic here tonight, maybe you might make some comments about the role of the indigenous people in all this movement. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Gregoire. Good evening, panelists, and thank you for having me. And just want to echo the sentiments of what our previous speakers had indicated, and to also indicate that is programs like this, because I know a question was asked earlier on as to how, in terms of the public or the persons in Dominica, are looking at reparations. And it's programs like these that will, basically let persons hear about what reparations speak about. Because when most people hear about the reparations, they immediately think money. And I heard Dr. Dublin indicated that people even asking up to the what are they getting? Well, what my family is going to get. But if there is an understanding, and I think Mr. Dr. Dublin stated that also, reparations is much broader than financial compensation. And for us to understand that reparations is basically about acknowledging the historical injustices, repairing the long-term damage that was caused by slavery or enslavement, the colonialism, and most importantly, that is something that, as was indicated earlier, that is unique to Dominica and St. Vincent, the indigenous disposition. And basically, what we are looking at is investing in the future of countries like Dominica. So for me, when I think of reparations, it's ultimately about justice, development, and basically that dignity. And one of the first questions one would have to ask, and in any time someone wants to challenge in terms of reparations, is if entire nations became wealthy because another people were exploited for centuries, what responsibility remains today? And that basically even answers itself, because these were the people who extracted the resources from our countries to build what they have today. And that is why I really appreciate the slant in which the 10-point plan basically takes the CARICOM, or CARICOM has taken that whole repertory justice with looking at first the formal apology, the Indigenous People Development Program, reparations and resettlement, restructuring of our cultural and heritage, not restructuring, but basically bringing back what was stolen from our cultural heritage and our cultural recollections. Because even that point, I remember when I was doing a paper for a thesis, and I was actually doing a comparative study on a plantation in Layu, and I had to pay the British Library for information about Dominica. And these information were taken from our country. And here am I paying £5 for something that was supposed to be legally here. So that point number 4 is very much important. Then you have remedying the public health crisis. 6 is the capacity building through education and training, compensation for gender-based violence and assault on the families. Then you have psychological rehabilitation, the right to sovereignty and development. And finally, and I know this was mentioned earlier in terms of debt cancellation. Now, what makes Dominica particularly unique in that whole case is that Dominica experienced the indigenous resistance, Kalinago displacement, enslavement of Africans and women, plantation exploitation, and the colonial economic extraction. So that is why, in terms of Dominica, Dominica remain, if you look at the history of Dominica, unlike other islands, Dominica remained unconquered by Europe powers for much longer than most of the Caribbean countries. And that was because of the resistance of our Kalinago people. For centuries, the Kalinagos defended their homeland against the French, the British, making Dominica one of the last islands in the Eastern Caribbean to be fully colonized. Now, their resistance, yes, it delayed the European settlement, but it also resulted in warfare, and it also resulted in displacement and demographic decline, and also the erosion of the indigenous sovereignty. So when we look at that, if we go back to the Treaty of Paris in 1763, Dominica, that was when Dominica was actually integrated into the whole plantation economy. And when that happened, thousands of enslaved Africans were brought into the island. And they were not brought there just for fun. They were brought there to 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 extract wealth, sugar, coffee, cotton, cocoa, lime, all other products. And the prosperity generated by the labor did not remain in Dominica. Had it remained there, we'll have seen a significant growth. But it did not remain in Dominica. Instead, it financed merchants, it financed banks, insurance companies, shipping enterprises, churches, governments in Europe. And while the island itself remained largely dependent on the colonial economy, designed to extract wealth rather than to build local prosperity. So it was just taken from the country itself. And Mr. Andre said it well, emancipation did not even end it, because the inequalities created by enslavement continued even after emancipation. So for Dominica, the argument for reparations is therefore not based on victimhood, but it is based on the historical events that wealth was systematically extracted from this island, while the people, both the Kalinago and the descendants of the enslaved Africans, were denied the opportunity to accumulate wealth, develop institutions, and to determine their own economic future. Now, if we have to zero in on the Kalinago people, when we are discussing reparations in Dominica, we must remember that, and Dr. Dublin said it, history did not begin with African enslavement. And that is one of the errors that most people make. And I don't blame them per se, because I was a teacher for 12 years and I taught history. And if you're not a person that is passionate about the subject itself, or one who is inclined to do more research, you would want to think that that's where the curriculum starts. But then from the time when you look at the curriculum, it's actually there. And it does start with the first topic, does start with the coming of the Spaniards, and it speaks about what the Spaniards meant. But what happens is that when persons look at the text, they only focus on the European aspect and they don't focus so much on the Kalinago people. And that's why most times when I speak to teachers, I encourage them that they are free to look at the information. There are a lot of Caribbean local writers who have written a lot about it in terms of Dominica historiography and Caribbean historiography that they can bring into the classrooms so that they can make the classroom more engaging, right? And so when people look at the whole reparation movement in terms of the Kalinagos, whose experiences from the whole colonial process is an essential part of the reparations conversation. And the CARICOM 10-point plan that we keep mentioning specifically recognizes the genocide and displacement of our indigenous people as one of the greatest injustices of European colonization. And if any case that has to be brought forward for Dominica, that is the first case that we have to bring forward. Before the plantation economy expanded, the Kalinago fiercely defended Dominica against the success of the successive French and British attempts, and their resistance earned Dominica a reputation as one of the most difficult countries, delaying the settlements. And then they came in and displaced these people, right? However, the Kalinagos' loss of their ancestral lands, the violent conflicts, the forced displacement, and demographic decline is something that we can put forward in terms of the case. So for Dominica, what we can look at in terms of reparatory justice is the strengthening of constitutional and legal protection for the indigenous rights. One, investment in the preservation and revitalization of the Kalinago language, tradition, and oral history. Investing in sustainable economic development for the Kalinago territory. Supporting indigenous education, research, and cultural institution. Documenting, returning, and preserving archaeological and historical sites that are across the island in terms of where there were Kalinago settlements, and expanding the opportunities for the indigenous entrepreneurship through whether it is through ecotourism or through the creative industries, and ensuring that the history of the Kalinago is taught accurately and meaningfully within all, I'm not saying our own, within all education systems. Not only that of Dominica, but it is something that's documented all over. Because I know that every child would know about the Indians in America and Indians and the cowboys, right? There is a way that we can allow them to know about the same indigenous people within the Caribbean and in Dominica. So basically for Dominica, reparations cannot be viewed solely through the lens of only slavery. And our history also includes that the disposition on resistance of the Kalinago people, and the CARICOM 10-point plan recognizes indigenous genocide as a distinct injustice requiring redress. And reparatory justice therefore means preserving the indigenous culture, strengthening the economic opportunities, and protecting the heritage, supporting education, and ensuring that the Kalinago remain active partners in shaping Dominica's future. And that's basically if we speak about the repertory history in terms of the Kalinagos.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, Steve Hyacinth, if you're listening, you should be proud of this young lady. Steve, I'm reaching out, giving a shout out to Steve. Hope you're listening to this discussion tonight. This young lady, your daughter, is very well informed and articulate. Dr. Andre, I want to come back to you for 1 minute before I go over to Ms. Eloy Labad, because, you know, Ms. Hyacinth just mentioned something about the Kalinago people. And then, of course, we know that when we speak about the Kalinago people, it cannot be just the people who live in the Kalinago territory, because, in fact, these people have a diaspora throughout Dominica. Because, I mean, you have Kalinagos living in Vacas, you have people of Kalinago roots living in Vacas, in Petit Savan, in Daly's, and you know, all over the place, all over Dominica. So in fact, there is a huge Kalinago population throughout Dominica. So your thoughts on the engagement of the Kalinagos in this period?
Well, certainly they were at the forefront. They were the shock troops, so to speak, in terms of colonial resistance, or the resistance of the colonies. But there's one glaring aspect of their existence today in Dominica that still bear all the hallmarks of colonial paternalism and its rather negative effects. That is to say, the setting up of the so-called Carib Reserve in the early decades of the 20th century. It was done ostensibly to protect them. But unfortunately, throughout the decades, it has become one of the most strongest impediments to their economic development. Why? Because yes, communal ownership is in many respects a good thing, but no communal ownership of the so-called reserve or their territory, it prevents them and inhibits them from getting involved or getting integrated in the Dominican economy. And that is a yoke that they continue to bear. And unfortunately, that yoke has made them susceptible and vulnerable to exploitation from the political entities or deities that we have in Dominica as we speak. They have not been able to borrow money from the banks. There's no indigenous institution which would give them concessionary rates, for example, based on their particular historical experiences, as is done in other countries, I should say, in many other countries, so that they continue to manifest the painful legacies of colonialism and the interaction of indigenous people in Dominica, St. Vincent, or otherwise, also in Latin America, their interaction with colonial people and so on, or the colonizers. So clearly, and our constitution doesn't speak to them as a particular discrete entity that should be respected and that should be catered to them, to their needs as a community, not individually. And that is one of the challenges Dominica will have going forward, that we haven't come to terms with the Kalinago people in Dominica, quite frankly. In fact, the policies of most of the governments that we've had, to varying degrees, is to integrate them into the Dominican community. There's nothing wrong in assimilation, but assimilation at what cost? Not at the cost of taking away the heritage, It's a struggle which goes on not just in Dominica, but in Canada, in other countries, and so on. In Brazil, certainly. And Brazil has had a long, painful history in terms of slavery. In fact, slavery was ended, if I remember serves me right, in 1888, for God's sakes. It persisted much longer than in the other West Indian islands. So the whole question of the Kalinago question is one that we haven't fully resolved, and hopefully enlightened leadership at some point in our future, probably after I've gone to the great beyond, will address that issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. I mean, Damien, is there anything you'd like to add quickly before I go over to Ms. Eloy Laban?
Yeah, I'll just add quickly while we focus on the Kalinago that I would want to just pay tribute to the first Kalinago doctor, Dr. Warren Sanford, who studied in Cuba. And he also was the first specialist in dermatology dealing with skin disease. So, and I've seen over the years the opportunities for the Kalinago have increased tremendously. I mean, we have the Kalinago in all spheres of Dominican professional and other life, legal, acting magistrates, accountants. And also I want to note that the awareness of the limitation of the communal land ownership was seen and discussed, and there is actually a guarantee fund which was set up specifically for that, where the Kalinago could take loans and build their homes and do what they have to do. So the guarantee fund actually exists, and I guess it's supplemented when need be. But we can say that they have made tremendous strides and respect. But I do agree that we need to, in terms of the constitutional review, we need to focus specifically on them and see in which areas we can, and besides the assimilation in areas that would directly benefit them, because they have I would say they have preserved our country. And quickly, I think we made one mistake after independence, is that we didn't change the name to Whitey Kubuli. And I mean, that mistake haunts us still. We should have changed the name of Dominica to Whitey Kubuli.
Well, in fact, the Constitution is not clearly identify the Kalinago people in there. So that is the first mistake. Now, Ms. Eloy Laban, let me go over to you. I know you've been waiting patiently. I know you have a lot to say. So I'll give you an opportunity now to add your thoughts to the conversation here tonight.
Thank you so much, and a pleasant good evening to the listening public. I want to believe that the panelists who have gone before me has really set the tone, having given sort of history of the reparations committees, genesis, and then some of the objectives and mandates covered by Dr. Dublin. And then Marita giving us a nice little history and in making sure that she sort of addressed some of the 10-point areas, 10-point plan for reparatory justice that sort of addresses our indigenous people, development programs, and some of the comments from Dr. Andre, particularly on the note of the Kalinago diaspora. My focus tonight is to bring an entrepreneurial slant. I am a Dominican by birth. I live in Dominica and I trade and do business in Dominica. I am also directly supporting a member of the committee and continue to talk about the connection with Africa, not as a fringe idea, not as something that is an ideal that, we, our icons, our freedom icons, started. Persons like Nelson Mandela, who's pushed back against apartheid and who contributed to the Ark of Remembrance, that statue that is, in the UN. In fact, in July, every July, Nelson Mandela is recognized, and the discussions about, reparatory justice becomes, elevated. But from my perspective, I attended an Africa Caribbean trade 2025 trade mission in Grenada. From analyst estimates, there is about roughly $1.2 billion US dollars in untapped annual trade between Africa and the Caribbean. And while there are currently no direct flights between most of Africa and the Caribbean, I do have to say that one of the things that excites me is that the connections and the ongoing movement between CARICOM and the African Union, where the African Union declared the Caribbean as the sixth region of Africa, which officially makes us African diaspora. We can go by land, live in Africa, and for quite so many of us, we are still feel very uncomfortable when they ask us to tick that box. Me, I'm proudly ticking Black African. So from my perspective, I think many of us are still, as young professionals, we're still very uncomfortable about discussing, the reparatory movement and the concept of reparatory justice. And we have perhaps left, as I would say from my perspective, a young professional, we have left a lot of the conversations, a lot of the discussions to our historians, our subject matter experts, the legal minds. And now this is an opportunity for persons like myself who have found herself trading directly with Africa, importing from Nigeria, importing from Ghana, working with local designers across the Caribbean, and connecting the Caribbean and Africa in a way that I would want to believe that Marcus Garvey would be proud. That black star line stands for something, and I think we need to find ways within our professional spaces to be able to raise these kind of conversations. When I connect with organizations like BPW International, we have consultative status in the UN. Do we have that confidence as professionals to be able to defend the 10-point plan? Are we willing to talk about debt cancellation and technology transfer and psychological rehabilitation in a way that not just presents the status as a movement, but I think sell reparations in a way that it's more than just a voice as a working committee, but it's a platform. And I want to also share that there are so many ways, for example, events like Fashion Zouk, and this perhaps is not an intentional pitch, but Fashion Zouk is going to be held at the end of August. It is a 4-day event that will tell the freedom story through fashion and culture. And these are opportunities. We spoke about tapping into human resources. This is where I say that we cannot leave it purely to the economists and the historians and the scholars and the diaspora communities. We really need to open it up to youth. We need to open it up to artisans. We need to open it up to cultural organizers, so that, insofar as the lessons that have been learned, they can be, connected across the generations. So the case for Dominica, definitely Marita has spoken about Dominica's unique stand and position. There are, the Kalinago persons and the case for genocide. And then, of course, this transatlantic slave case. Dominica is home to the last remaining indigenous Kalinago people. And there are still a resonance of discrimination. There are still resonances of colorism, of what is considered unprofessional, what is considered uncultured, what is considered open quotes, ghetto. And I think having these conversations allows us to sort of build trust, build awareness, bridge the gaps. We are not just asking about, we are not just asking for payment. Yes, we want an apology, and we know for so many of them, this apology feels like a very uncomfortable, expensive apology. But I think more than anything, we have continued to say that the governments and the systems that have benefited from, the pillaging of our art, our culture, our gold, our, raw materials, our systems of mathematics. And I mean, we taught hygiene, and there's so many things that the world have benefited from because of Africa, that we now want to say many of those systems have become enriched and empowered because of that pulling away. And because those systems still exist, those governments still exist, those universities and those institutions still exist, and they have benefited the peoples of Africa, and their descendants need to be willing to stand and engage honestly about how we've been impacted by, the transatlantic slave. So for me, Dr. Andre has already shared some of the precedents that have been set with Germany and Israel, the United States, and even the UK, when he spoke about the UK and Kenya. And it was very eye-opening to see the three countries that, voted against, and even, I think, even more eye-opening to see the number of abstentions. So when you think about trade and what it's worth to the Caribbean and the people of Africa, and just connecting those peoples. Even when we sit on organizations where the Caribbean is being represented, and the conversation about looking at the Caribbean as individual countries or islands as opposed to one region, these things perpetuate, sort of create barriers for us as small island states that are struggling with our development cycles, our government cycles. And so I definitely believe that there is a need for the committee to continue to ramp up that conversation, to include the youth, to include the young professionals like myself and Marita, so that we can continue to create that, that activism, that action. We've come a long way from just the Ark of Return, sitting in the UN, open square, to UN votes, to the decade of our ancestors, a first decade, a second decade, and the 10-point plan. I mean, we've moved a long way. So I think I will pause, maybe more for dramatic effect than anything.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ms. Eloy Labad. I'm going to go over to Lambi so to give the numbers out to the public so they can engage us with a few calls. But when we come back, I want to go back to Dr. Andre for him to give me a little bit more on, well, as we can see from what Ms. Labad has just said, I mean, these European countries are continuing to exploit Africa's natural resources. And then, of course, Dr. Andre, I would want you to make a comment, if you can, put your thoughts, wrap your thoughts around this question of, so should the descendants of slaves receive compensation from those who enslaved their ancestors? And I think we did mention the question of intergenerational trauma and economic legacies of slavery to justify reparations. So I want you to probably address those when we come back to you. But let me go over to you to give the numbers out so we can take a few calls.
Global View on Q, taking your calls at this moment. The numbers are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are local numbers. The international or the overseas number, 449-309-5624. Let me run those one more time. 449-309-59697, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. And we already have a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead. We lost that one. Here we go. Caller, please go ahead.
Hey, gentlemen, blessings to you all.
Blessings to you, sir.
Ladies, sorry, excuse my manners.
You're excused.
Good evening, blessing.
Great woman.
Yeah, no, you're excused, we said.
Just joking. And Lambi and everybody, blessings to you all in the interest of time.
Okay.
We think the game is over, but it has just begun. You know, racism and prejudice, even we against the Kalinago people and against ourselves, because we can't be racist against our own selves. We can only be prejudiced against ourselves. But racism, we manifesting against the Kalinago people. So all that get all in a bouillon, so to speak. Voluntary slaves, the church, the bank, and government. All of them want to be masters, not want to be, they are the masters, the modern day masters. You have these three institutions that are manifesting and exercising the voluntary slaves, just like on the plantation, some people to escape the hell. They figure out they have to be conspiring with the enslavers, as brutal as it was. They could not imagine themselves being on the receiving end. So they join, you know, into the melee. Adding insult to injury. We can do it too. Punchinella. What can you do? Punchinella in the shoe. How can we be adding insult to injury when we are selling our passports because we figure out they are indebted to us? So we can violate the global security because our passports end up in the hands of crooks and criminals. And now we figure out, for me to stop, you have to give me something. What's the word they use again? You know, something tangible, not tangible, not the word they use, substantial, I think, substantial. You listen to Gaston Brown and people like Scary talking about they want something substantial when they're adding insult to injury. The corruption in the Caribbean. I'm watching in Guyana, a ferry capsized and kill a lot of indigenous people. 80-something years an old ferry. So you could see the discrimination. Venezuela money disappear. The World Bank money disappear in Dominica. I spend over $2,000 to meet 8 requirements to get $6,666, I think somewhere around there. Skerrit say, you know something, we will check all you. So he may have sift through the pile and give to who he wants and disappear the rest of the money. Venezuela money disappear. So I am just saying, we have to be very, very, very careful in the way this money, if at all these monies would be given to us. You know, not in the hands of government. Maybe we can negotiate with Europe to set up a bank in the Caribbean where this monies can be loaned to business people, artisans, musicians, farmers, and pay almost like maybe a 2% or 3% to maintain a revolving fund in case they give us like a couple billions of dollars or whatever, millions of dollars, I don't know. But never to be in the hands of these corrupt criminals in the Caribbean. Or you may take offense, but I am being blunt. My truth is always naked, not even on the way I want it. So I'm just saying the whole cry would be it is justified to get reparation. Look at all those what you mentioned. You know, Japan and everybody get. But the racism is so entrenched and intrinsic in the nature, the racism and the discrimination. Never would they want to give us. And we know who runs the world. And we know they were involved in slavery, the Jewish people, the church and all of them. So you think they want to put us on a footing for us to return to our former glory? Never. We have a long way to wait. Thanks for the time and Thanks for all your contributions. Thanks for the persistence, and we have a long way to go. Let's watch the world. Let us watch the world, though. Just the beginning of things. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your contribution tonight. Lamb, you want to take another call?
Yeah. Caller, please go ahead.
Good evening, Lambert, Mr. Sheridan Gregoire, and as host and audio.
Yeah, good evening.
To summarize all what Blessings has covered in detail, the question I would like to ask is slavery finished with, or has it just evolved in a way, and are we still being exploited? And should we be saying stop the exploitation rather than even starting to ask for reparations? Should we be saying stop the exploitation because our money is in the hand? You know all the details already. But that's the question I'd like to ask, gentlemen. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks a lot for that intervention. Lambi, you want to take another call?
Yes. Caller, please. Oh, we lost that call.
All right. So yeah, well, I guess the person will probably call back in a moment. Well, let's take it now then.
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes. Good evening. Yes.
Yes. Good evening.
And the panelists, Mr. G and everybody, have a super blessed night. Mr. Andre, I want to ask the question. This one is for you. I know you are a black historian. Didn't the Arabs enslave black people too? And Mr. Dublin, I want to ask the question. And the Riot Act, see they they arrested 25 people for protesting. Dominica law say you have the right to protest. And they say they charge them under the Riot Act. That's a slavery act. So I want to ask the government to take out this on the Riot Act, please. This is outdated. And they need to put laws in place, so that they could help their people more, for reparations, yeah. And we need some, the King of England, and we need some reparations, sir, please. Yeah, you guys, and we help all you a lot. All you can help us out, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Let me take another call.
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
Yes.
You're on. Please go ahead.
I hear nothing about repatriation. How come now? I have a 10 plan. I don't know what the 10 plan, but I hear nothing about repatriation. And repatriation is supposed to start out of the package because we were taken from our land, our parents' land, where we have a right to return. Nobody can stop that. That has to be part of that 10 plan. I'm not supposed to leave that out because we're not from Dominica. We met people there, we met Carib there. It belongs to them, it belongs to us. Right now we have a right to ask for our right to go back where we belong. We haven't got no right here.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for that. I imagine he's talking from a perspective of the Kalinago. Lambi, if you receive any other calls, you can just make us a signal. Okay, let's take the call now.
Caller, please go ahead.
Hello,
yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Hi, good evening. I'm not hearing clear. Hi.
You're on. We're hearing you loud and clear. Go right ahead.
Right. I'd just like to say thank you to the Global UNQ for this program. I caught it late, but I think it's long overdue. Where do I start? It's at least it's good to know that we have a public discussions about reparations. I think that's been lacking for too long when it's been in the air in the Caribbean for quite a while. And the reparations committee, to me, I would just say up front hasn't, been active enough for the benefit of the public vis-a-vis reparations. A couple of things I just want to say is that, in what I heard, the issue of reparations is fundamentally, from my view, a recognition, an attempt to
repair that damage that because of the chattel slavery and the colonial period, we had even come to, we the descendants, what I like to call ascendants of the enslaved, had even come to not recognize our forebears as humans, as ancestors. And the primary objective of the whole reparations issue is to repair that damage as to how we regard those who went before us. And so, from my perspective, everything else is secondary. And it would be a disservice to those enslaved Africans who are ancestors to not actively pursue the reparations agenda, regardless of how successful it is, because just to pursue it is to recognize their humanity, which we had learned to not recognize. We were taught to see them as slaves, as subhuman, etc., and not as humans, as ourselves. So I think just the fact that it's on the agenda is already a win for us who are here now, representing our ancestors who have passed on. The other thing that concerns me as somebody who is sort of biased towards the reparative issue is that the repair that we seek, and we tend to concentrate a lot on the economic aspect of it, which is natural, which is understood. But the fundamental reason for that is, as Dr. Andre alluded to, is that the effects of that injustice or that inhumanity of man to man still lives with us today because of the intergenerational trauma that has been transmitted from generation to generation. But at the same time, the descendants of the enslavers or the colonialists are enjoying the fruits of that. So whilst we are reaping the negative aspects of it, the descendants of the enslavers are enjoying the positive aspects of it. So therein lies the argument that refutes this thing that, well, we weren't the ones who enslaved you, we weren't there, and so it is sort of not just to expect us to repair the damage. But that argument, I mean, even if it's not a legal one, I understand that. But from a moral point of view, from a humane point of view, it is justified. Because whilst one side of the argument is suffering from those activities, another side is enjoying and benefiting from those activities. So that's just one or two contributions I'd like to make. And I'm curious because I was listening to this thing, I was trying to figure out, well, in the Dominica context, seeing that so little has happened, I was wondering under which ministry in Dominica does this whole issue of reparations lie? And maybe we need to address them a little bit more, because given Ms. Hyacinth's contribution on the importance of the reparative justice issue to Dominica, I would expect it to be a much higher priority on the agenda of the government. And it should not have been in the doldrums for so long, because even this program tonight, it doesn't come out of the initiative of the ministry or the reparations committee. It comes out from civil society, meaning Q95, meaning this. So you cannot tell how do you justify that Dominica is so unique in this whole thing. Dominica is the one that is placed to benefit the most. Yet Dominica is the island in the Caribbean where you hear least about the reparations issue. So I think that is an issue for the I don't know, the committee as well as the government ministry that is under which the reparation issue rises to address, because you cannot not be addressing it here and then you're talking about we talking about other people addressing it when it is most important to Dominica as an island in the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot for that contribution. I'm sure Dr. Damien Dublin is taking some notes, and when we come to him, he will respond to that. But Doctor, let me just go back to Dr. Andre. Dr. Andre, I hope you heard much of those comments made by 2 or 3 or 4 of the callers. And but just before I go on to you, Dr. Andre, let's take a call from Lambi.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't only help the government of the tribal countries, especially with slaves, who were to take an active part in that, because they are the ones who could really come together and demand what we want and who will be behind them. Unless we to take that step, it will be hard. Already is a struggle.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that contribution. I can see there's a lot of interest in the discussion. Lambi, you take another call?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead on the overseas line. Caller, are you listening? Go ahead, please. Nothing heard. Go ahead.
All right. So it looks like maybe this caller will call back. Yeah, Dr. Andre, let me just go back over to you because you see these calls are coming in. So for your further comments on some of the questions asked tonight.
Yeah, just a few things. One of your callers made the question about Arabs being involved in the slave trade. Well, the unfortunate and inconvenient truth is that Africa was the unhappy hunting ground for everyone with power. And the fact that Arabs were involved doesn't make it right. On the contrary, it just indicates the magnitude of the problem. You asked, Mr. G, should descendants receive compensation? Let me ask you this. Should the descendants of those persons, the Jewish persons who were killed during Nazi Germany, should they receive compensation? Should indigenous people in Canada who were victimized by rabid colonization and racism, should they not receive compensation? Why is it that they should receive compensation? And the descendants of those persons who were enslaved, and it's not just a matter of enslaved, I mean, we have to look at the history, the actual history, not the cosmeticized history, the actual history. Read the book on slavery in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Barbados, right here in Dominica, well, right there in Dominica. The brutality with which slaves' uprisings were suppressed, the sadistic violence deployed against them. That is where you get the full context or the full complexion of the brutality of what we're talking about. So it seems to me that there is absolutely no viable argument to be made. There's a moral justification for compensation. In my view, there's a legal question, because while slavery may not have been proscribed or criminalized, but theft of property, the destruction of humanity. What about those slaves who were lost on the so-called Middle Passage? What about the prosecution of a captain or a British captain of a slave ship who simply and callously threw over 200 slaves from his boat because the seas were a little rough, and he fought the case in court. Ultimately, he lost. So this is not just a matter of saying that, these people are just allowed to work and so on. There's a certain brutality that was endemic in slavery, despite all the most recent attempts to whitewash it, to say, well, they were not badly treated. They had their own plots of land. Pure nonsense. So there's no question that the justification is there. There's no question that, unfortunately, from an objective perspective, many Caribbean governments or many governments of those countries, even in Africa, they have not learned the lessons of the past. One of the justifications for the enslavement of persons was to get rich at the expense of these countries, was to take the resources of these countries to feather the nests of the colonizers. Isn't that still happening in the region and in Africa, my friend? Isn't it continuing? And if that is the case, then what have we learned as a people in terms of national upliftment, in terms of sovereignty? What lessons have we learned? Not many, quite frankly. And the question is, yes, reparation is a justification that has to be prosecuted to the fullest hilt. But have we liberated ourselves from mental slavery, my friend? In many aspects, we haven't. And that, in my view, it makes it easy for the former colonizers to justify why they're giving these islands money at all. What will they do with it? They will go at, they will try to set up in the gardens. What is it again? A bowling alley, Gasso. Very indigenous game, a bowling alley in the botanic gardens. That's what they'll use the money for. You know? So, there's two components. Reparations is a justification that has to be prosecuted, but at the same time, we have to act on the benefit of our indigenous people, and we have to ensure that whatever form reparation takes, it inures to the benefit and upliftment of the persons in the islands, the former descendants of former slaves. We're not talking about charity, you know. We're talking about reparation. We're talking about giving back what you took, atoning for the harm that you did. And we're not using religious dogma to justify this. We're just using standards of what is right and what is wrong. There's one component of this restoration thing that we haven't talked about: the repatriation of artifacts. In Dominica, that may not be a central justification for reparations, but in many other countries, whether it's in India, in Africa, in other countries, the colonizers virtually stole the artifacts, the historical artifacts of the colonized persons. And there is a strong movement as we speak to repatriate these artifacts, which have been housed in private collections in England, in museums all over the place. And I should say that at least it's a good sign that there have been cases where many of those artifacts that were stolen were actually returned. And I think that is part of the process of healing. Now, I can't remember whether Dominica has a museum. I really don't know. Probably where the public library used to be, there is a museum taking place. No, there's not. And again, it's an indictment that we have not shown the sufficient degree of interest in preserving our history and defining what Dominica is all about, what Dominican people should aspire towards. What are their goals? What should they aspire to? I think I'll stop.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Andre. Dr. Dublin, I believe you've been taking some copious notes on some of the questions asked and some of the comments made. Your further thoughts. Your mic is muted. You need to unmute your mic.
Okay, very interesting comments. I mean, it's always good when I always like these discussions when you get input from the callers. What it shows in some areas, some callers, is that same perception that we have to nullify that reparations is about monetary. There seems to be a lot of stress on monetary and when it comes, how we're gonna spend. While we, on one hand, lauding our people on the achievements and progress in other fields, we tend to minimize the same capacity of Caribbean governments to be able to manage resources that come in one way. I mean, we've seen examples of countries managing resources in different ways. A lot of development projects coming through in all the islands in the Caribbean. So that is management of resources. I mean, whether it's from loans, grant, negotiation IMF or World Bank, and they manage it. But I think we just need to have a little more faith in our people. I mean, you have a right to be concerned, but that constant talk sometimes I hear of the money comes and it goes to government. Government is a cycle. You have a set of politicians there in government. Next election cycle, they're gone. Another set comes. So if we keep that perception as a general, as like a placard and politicians and governments, we need to really just be more practical in thinking in that aspect, because we in the Caribbean have done a lot and developed. We have this, for example, this EC dollar. I mean, the stability of the EC dollar is remarkable. I mean, growing up from little boy to up to now, how many years, the EC dollar, it's still the same. So it shows that we have people who continue to be resilient. Another question was repatriation is.
Let me just butt in there for 1 second.
Yeah.
That you mentioned the EC dollar. I was on the board of the East Caribbean Central Bank. It was called East Caribbean Currency Authority at the time when the EC dollar was pegged to the US dollar at 2.7169. So I recall all of the discussion, the conversations around that time. I mean, in terms of our doing business, we stopped doing so much business with the UK, and a lot more trade was taking place with the US. So I mean, I just wanted to say this because I had personal experience when this, at the time I was on the East Caribbean Currency Authority board, when the dollar was pegged at a fixed parity of 2.7169 to the EC dollar. So I could talk a little bit more about it, but you go right ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for that. On the question of repatriation, I said repatriation is part of the 10-point plan, and it's a very important aspect for two reasons. I think Dr. Andre mentioned an aspect which is interesting, the question of repatriation of artifacts, which seemed to be a big movement with a lot of artifacts. In fact, I went to London and I was amazed. I mean, when you go in a park or the museum, I mean, you see all the artifacts are there from Africa, from everywhere. You can go to London and get the history visually of probably all the African countries, the drums. In fact, just recently, there's a movement in Kenya to get, the ancestral drum. That drum is about maybe 10 or 15 feet high, and it's there in the museum. So there's a movement to get that back to Kenya. That was a big symbol of the people. So that is key, the question of the return of the artifact. Repatriation of diaspora is happening. Ghana actually established a year or two, year of return, where they were calling all diasporan Africans to come back. Burkina Faso have a citizenship, special citizenship program for all their people who are out and other people. I'm part of an organization called ADI, which is headed by, she was a diplomat, this very powerful lady. I think it's the name can't come now, but a very powerful lady. And she has this organization.
Maybe Dr. Andre might be able to help us out.
Yeah, she come bear something. She was an ambassador at the UN and then fall, and then she created this movement. She's from Zimbabwe, but the name cannot come right now. But she has this movement, this is called ADI, and that's because of their influence, they're able to get citizenship for people who are in the diaspora. But the question of repatriation is very important, especially for the Rastafari. They have been hitting at this aspect for a long time. In fact, in Ethiopia, this Dominican guy is in Ethiopia, this Trotter guy. We had some time, Haile Selassie actually encouraged them to come, Jamaicans, Dominican, and he went to Ethiopia in a particular area and is actually living there. So it's a continuous movement. Dr. Pascal called IP, I recognize his voice, and he made some very salient points, the whole aspect of the benefits. The descendants continue to enjoy the benefits while we continue to feel the negative effects. So that is justification, moral. It may not stand probably in a legal court, but moral. When the whole reparations committee was formed, it really, because of the CARICOM decision, it was for cabinet decision, we were under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that's the ministry with responsibility for the reparations committee. But I do agree that, I mean, anything else, a lot more visibility, a lot more of this kind of forum is necessary. So, I mean, I would fully agree that the more the merrier, besides what we're doing in the schools and the panel discussion in the radio, but this kind of discussions tend to have a far reach. I mean, we can see by the amount of callers that people are actually listening. So that's what I gleaned from some of the comments made.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that. Now, if we can go over to Ms. Hyacinth, I mean, one caller, in fact, made the point. I think it may have been Dr. Ivy who made the point that this Ms. Hyacinth did stress on this particular thing, which is that the whole system, the education system, need to embrace this thing. And she talked about going to the schools and doing stuff, but then there is no continuity. I mean, so this is why I asked you the question earlier on, what is the committee doing to ensure that Dominicans continuously become engaged in this thing, not just the Rastafarian movement, but all of Dominica, and especially the indigenous people of Dominica, because they were the most aggrieved. As a caller said, I mean, we came and took their land. That is basically what happened. So let me just go over to Ms. Hyacinth to give us a further thoughts on the topic here tonight.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gregoire. And in terms of the education reform, I do agree in terms of it being embraced. And one area where reparations can have and should have immediate impact on populace would be in education. And if you look at it, many of our students still would leave school knowing very little about our African history before slavery. They would also know very little about the Kalinago resistance. They will do very little about the Dominican freedom fighters, the economic foundations of colonialism, or the contributions of Caribbean people to our world development. And what I normally, and I said that before, is I try to tell teachers that the curriculum guides them, and they should not be very much selective in history. History should never be selective. Education itself, as I said before, it's a form of repertory justice. And when people understand where they came from, they better understand where they're going. It's easier for them to understand certain things and not be misled. And too often people assume that because this is happening, that the schools don't teach it, or just not in the curriculum, but it is there. And as I said before in the discussion, as a person who taught history for over 12 years, I do believe that the issue is not the curriculum. I believe the issue is the willingness to go to do the research. The curriculum does include topics such as African history, African civilizations, slavery, emancipation, Kalinago people, and Caribbean history. I note that a question was raised as to if Dominica has a museum. And one of the ways in which I was doing my research, we do have a museum. I would have gone to the museum that's on Bayfront. And also there is the National Archives unit that is right in the ministry yard. If you go to that's in this building, as soon as you enter into the government headquarters gate, there's the National Archives. And the staff there, once you go there, you tell them the topic, and you'll be amazed at the type of primary sources that are available within the National Archives unit that is available for persons who are indeed interested in doing some level of research. And again, you can't blame persons again, because it comes with the passion. It comes with the passion for the subject. And again, we might want to blame the past, because if history was taught prior with the understanding of how the African culture did not start off with slavery, and there were mighty nations before, and the persons would have been more inclined to have a passion for history. But when you start off history thinking of history as a thing of slavery and persons harmed and tortured, it may have some kind of negative connotation on the mentality of the person. So the greater challenge is how the topics are taught, not rather if the curriculum holds it, but how the topics that are taught. The curriculum can only provide the framework, but the teacher must have the passion, they must have the preparation and the commitment to research to bring history to life. And one of the things I always tell teachers, if you need the assistance, I'm really available to even give you simple teaching methods as to how to deliver certain topics that can inspire a child. Because if a teacher relies solely on a prescribed textbook, students receive only a minimum required knowledge. But when an educator engages with the current scholarship, primary sources, and local history, students gain a much richer understanding of who they are, where they came from. You know, we have books, Mr. Irving Andre has written books. We have Mr. Richards, we have Mr. My Father. You understand? These people have books that are there that young people can look at, and teachers can use as resources, and bring it into the classroom. So the objective is not really to rewrite history, but to write a more complete history, so that one 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 that is grounded in evidence and reflects the experiences of our Caribbean people themselves. So there was the social studies textbook that I co-write. One of the things that I made sure that was done was to bring in, because too often we'll have heard content coming from Barbados, Trinidad, and Jamaica. But one of the things that I strive to do was to bring in content from the small islands like Dominica, St. Lucia, Antigua, so that when this textbook reaches into the Jamaica market and into the Trinidad market and Barbados market where it is, they get to know more about the Caribbean and more about the different countries in the Caribbean. So repertory justice therefore includes making this growing body of scholarship more accessible to teachers, students, researchers, and the wider public. And it also means if that's where we want to focus, investing more in the local archives, the museums, the digital collections, the curriculum resources, and teacher professional development, so that the latest historical research finds its way into our classrooms.
That's excellent. And obviously, there's no shortage of books written in the islands. I mean, Dr. Andre here has written several books. I mean, Gabriel Christian. I mean, there's several other people in the islands that have written many books that are great reference. But let me just go over to Miss Eloy Labad, because as like everything else, when when you're having a great time, the time runs down very quickly. And we almost coming to the end of it. You see, as I told him, 2 hours runs very, very quickly. So Miss Labad, I mean, your additional thoughts on the topic here tonight.
So my thoughts are that I know that there is continued pushback, I would say. And I know Dr. Damien Dublin and members of the committee, with support from the wider CARICOM body, we recognize that there are questions that, we have to be ready to become about those questions. Some of those questions, like, who should be paying. Why should we have to pay? It wasn't a crime then. And the position continues to really be that these are crimes against humanity. And the UN itself has sort of provided some support to position the injustice of slavery as a sort of against any sort of modern or legal standard. The crimes against enslaved peoples speaks for itself. And so I think one of the ways that we can continue to engage, I think Marita gave some really great perspective in terms of, a wholesome education system that sort of repositions and provides young persons with the opportunity to reimagine their freedom story. I keep saying that we are not striving towards Black excellence. We are Black excellence. We've obviously had a particular experience, and we've shown immense resilience. But I think it's really important that we continue to advocate for reparatory justice. I know that there are conversations around, how does the Black male and what is the experience of the Black male, particularly within the Caribbean setting. When you look at the Caribbean and many of the organizations and the international aid agencies, there are many programs, pitched against, the empowerment of girls and women. But, the Caribbean male has had a unique and specific and distinct experience. And so I believe that the August is an opportunity for us as we, reminisce and celebrate freedom and emancipation, to begin to dig deeper on what emancipating ourselves and supporting our people to sort of embrace the concept of, what would reparations mean for our community? What would it mean for our health system? What would it mean for our education system? And what would it mean for trade, particularly between Africa and the Caribbean? So from my perspective, I have an upcoming event. I have already positioned myself to connect with the committee. I expect members of the committee to come out and support and to participate in the discussions and to allow for that forum to sort of engage people in a different way. In Dominica, we have been advocates of our culture. We have fought for Creole, the Creole language. We have fought for the wearing of the madras, and we have fought for, basically the retelling of our freedom story. And I think that the work of the committee will continue as entrepreneurs like myself continue to launch out in bold initiatives. I mean, that is something that I see that as a gap being bridged between Ghana and Dominica, between Nigeria and Dominica. People say, what, girl, you doing business with Nigeria? You're not afraid of 419? I say, girl, it have plenty 419 in Dominica. So, there are so many opportunities and so many peoples. I remember when I launched my consulting page, I was a little bit upset with the algorithm. I said, you just keep making South Africa people send message for me, and I'm trying to figure out like what is wrong with the Facebook algorithm that so many persons in the diaspora, connecting with my page and reaching out to me. And I thought, my goodness, not so, wait a while, think about it. That's millions of people that you don't have in Dominica. You need to start thinking about it in terms of dollars and cents, but beyond dollars and cents, impacts, in programs, in access to manufacturing, in access to technology. I mean, these people are, they are light years ahead of us. And I really admire that, despite so many challenges that they continue to overcome, Africa is on the map in every single continent. And so we were not taken from Africa and then trade started and then slavery started. Africa was already trading with the quote unquote world, you know, and we had our systems in place. And I just pray that we continue to allow ourselves to work together and collaborate in a way that, you know, will honor, you know, our ancestors, the sacrifices that persons like Marcus Garvey and Nelson Mandela and Kwame Nkrumah and all of the other, you know, great icons. And of course, I thank Dr. Damien and Dr. Irvin Andre for being a source of immense knowledge. And I just hope that the committee will, you know, sort of embrace some of the UN pronouncements as opportunities to continue to engage, advocate, if that is a better word.
Well, thanks so much, Ms. Nisilo Elabada. I'm assuming this is your closing remark. All right. Well, because you see the time is kind of running out on us, so let me go back to Ms. Hyacinth for your closing comments on the topic here tonight, because I think you did make a remarkable contribution to the discussion here tonight.
Okay, thank you. So my closing comments, just want to say, make it short. Reparations are not about for us to remain trapped in the past. And I don't want the people to think of it that way. I don't know if how many persons have ever experienced this. When we're younger, our parents would have promised us, if you pass common entrance, you will get a trip to Disneyland. And you pass common entrance, but you never reach Disneyland. But the point is, you gain the experience of actually passing common entrance because there was some motivation. And I see it that way, in that with reparations, it is not about us just receiving a check. I think the process of us arguing or putting forward our case and would help us to enlighten persons as to what we have been through, and that we are refusing to carry the past forward uncorrected. And Dominica's claim must include both the descendants of Africa and the Kalinago people, and it must be grounded evidence. And again, as I will come back and say, it must be linked to education and development, and protected by the governance strong enough to earn the public trust. The final test will not be if we receive the trip to Disneyland or to receive the check, but the test is whether repertory justice expands dignity, our knowledge, opportunity, and the ownership for generations to come.
Yeah, thanks a lot for those wonderful closing remarks. Dr. Damien Dublin, Chairman of the Dominica Reparations Committee, your closing remarks?
Yeah, well, let me thank you, Mr. G, for this opportunity. I think it was a well thought of idea to have the conversation, and I think tonight was very enriching. And the callers who called give some insights, and I just want to say reparation is a national movement or ideal. It doesn't belong to any government or particular ministry under which it's under. It doesn't belong to the reparations committee. We are just the vehicle now, but eventually others will come along and carry the charge. There have been others who have been holding the fort. Quite a few individuals, the Rastafari movement have always been at it. So the Kalinago chat to the path, I still feel that the Dominica's name will be reverted to its original Kalinago name. I hope I'm alive when it would happen. And also, I would want to see a monument erected in favor of the Kalinago. There was some talk about it in the roundabout Poncase. I still feel it's a still great location, and something should be done, because the history itself speaks, so they actually kept and preserved the Dominica land, Waitukubuli, for itself. I'm noting some of the comments and suggestions. I think the reparations committee will embrace some of them, and I know we can do much more. We should do much more for the kind of quality and content that we have, and we will endeavor to take it to the next level and embrace much more. But thanks for the opportunity, and I think the narrative was very important. I just quickly, the name I was struggling with is Ambassador Arikana Chiambori Kwa. She was the former ambassador to the United Nations, so Zimbabwe. In fact, she heads this institution, ADI, African Diaspora Development Institute, and she's doing tremendous work. I became a member of that organization, and because of that membership, I could have qualified for citizenship to Burkina Faso, but it's just that I did all the applications, but at the time they were making the trip, I was not available, so the application still pending. But it's tremendous work going out there in the diaspora, and we have to recognize and embrace it, and together we can make good things happen. Thanks again to all the panelists.
Let me ask you before you go. In terms of the actual committee, which falls under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is there any initiative by the committee to get this statue, as we say, of Kalinago on the roundabout at Goodwill?
We have made recommendations. We have, honestly, I mean, most times that we give reports, we mention it, but right now I think probably a little more energized to maybe get it going, and maybe link with the Kalinago Council or the Kalinago rep and see how we can make that become a reality, because we actually have the statue erected in favor of the Maroons right by the Fortune Hotel, which is great, but we need to do the same for the Kalinago. So we will push it a little more.
And on the other matter of the Kalinago Council itself, is the committee really taking any initiative to establish the independence of the Kalinago Council?
That's an interesting one. Indindependence.
The independence of the Kalinago Council.
That's a topic by itself. That's another whole. But I mean, it's an interesting concept that can be worked on. I mean, the council exists; it has its statutes, but the question of making them more, I mean, maybe more powerful, more autonomous within, it is an ongoing discussion, which probably
well, they're supposed to be independent.
They're supposed to be.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they're supposed to be. But thanks a lot for the closing remarks.
Yeah.
Dr. Andre, you have the final word.
Well, let me commend the panelists. I think they all acquitted themselves very well. And let me thank those who've stayed up to listen to us. Let me thank you, and let me thank Lambi, and let me thank Sherwin, and so on. I'll just start with one short comment on the whole Kalinago question. I think you put Mr. Dr. Damien in an unfair position, because that's what you call a hot political potato. And he wouldn't want to espouse or express too many public views on that issue. But it's a vexing question, and unfortunately, it has a lot of political ramifications. On August the 1st, we will be celebrating Independence Day. It's the day when the liberation of slaves is celebrated throughout most of the world. I'm not sure exactly where it's not, but throughout most of the world. And that is a day generally we regard as a day of reflection, a day of looking at our resilience, a day of looking at our determination, a day of meditating on how far we've come, and a day of contemplating, hopefully with gusto, what is there to achieve. And that is how, in my view, we should look at the whole question of reparation. Not an obsession with the past, but an obsession with righting wrongs that will stimulate us to take our rightful place among the community of nations. And that is something that we have to do as a people. That is something we have to do to inspire young people. That's something we have to do to show, to expose the lie of slavery, which is to say that we were less than human beings who deserved to be slaves. And it's on that note that I will end. that in many ways we've already shown that. But it seems to me that the whole focus on reparation, the whole celebration of independence is to enable and to excite and to inspire the generations to come. So I end on that note. A good night to you. Thank you, Mr. G.
And thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. Thanks a lot to all the wonderful folks who were with us on Facebook and on YouTube, following us tonight. Thanks a lot for your comments. We didn't get to read any of them. We didn't, in fact, get to take all the calls that we're trying to come through tonight. Well, thanks a lot to our panelists, to Ms. Deloy Labad, to Ms. Hyacinth, and to you, Dr. Damian Dublin, and then Dr. Andre, for the tremendous contribution that you made to this discussion tonight. I think this discussion is unfinished business, because I'm sure the committee will continue to discuss it. Especially, Ms. Labad has some really good ideas about trade and so on with African countries. As you can see, many of these colonial countries are taking advantage of the resources, the natural resources of these African countries. And then what is it left for us in the Caribbean? The diaspora. Yes, the African countries made the initiative to try to get us to, become citizens of their countries, some of them. But the point is, there's always good to have more meaningful, closer trade relations with the African continent. We really should be thinking about that. So cheers to Ms. Deloy Labad for taking that initiative. And so thanks a lot, Lambi. Thanks a lot, Sherwin. And thanks a lot, everybody. Just left for me to say good night to everybody. Have a great night and see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good night to all.
Yeah, thank you, Lambi. Yeah.
All right, good evening.
Holding the
Good
fort.
evening.
Okay, bye.
Okay, all the best.
Okay, bye.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating